Mark 14, 15, and 16. Today we finish the Gospel of Mark. The Gospels tell the greatest story ever told. Jesus Christ, God become man who suffered and died to save us. But despite being a cradle Catholic, I've never read them all the way through, and that changes now. Join me as we journey through the life of our Savior, his words, his miracles, and his sacrifice like never before. And these three chapters bring us a lot. They have everything we'd expect, like Judas's betrayal, Peter denying Jesus, the Lord's Supper, Garden of Gethsemane, the crucifixion, the resurrection, everything. But there are a few things that are included that weren't in Matthew's gospel, and there are a few things that Matthew included that aren't in Mark's gospel. For starters, we don't have a paragraph about Judas hanging himself, meaning Matthew made a concerted effort to include Judas hanging himself. It means that clearly had a larger effect on Matthew, or he felt it was a larger part of the story. In chapter 14, we get the fulfillment of what I was speaking about yesterday, when Jesus was warning several times before the end of the age, stay awake, do not fall asleep, stay awake, stay awake. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter and the rest of the disciples, while they were on watch while Jesus was praying, fell asleep not once, not twice, but 3 times. And on the 3rd time, he finally says to them, "It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Now, I'm still a little shocked in chapter 15 about Pilate's reaction to all of this. It's very clear Rome just wants order. When the chief priests were screaming to crucify Jesus after denying releasing him and chose Barabbas, the murderer and insurrectionist, to be released over him, Pilate asked them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Now, something I didn't realize when we were reading through Matthew's gospel was when Jesus was saying, "Take up your cross and follow me," that actually at the time must have been very jarring. They didn't know he was going to be crucified. And the cross very much was a symbol of crucifixion, but not the way we see it today because of Jesus having died on the cross. They didn't have that hindsight. So to them, I'm surprised there wasn't like a more visceral reaction to saying like, what do you mean take up your cross? It was not seen as a holy symbol at the time. It was seen as oppression and death and torture. And I'm sure there are many other adjectives that I'm leaving out here, but it was not looked at fondly. It's almost like another way that Jesus is foretelling what's going to happen. And maybe I hadn't realized that at the time because we have the, I guess, gift of hindsight here when we hear the phrase, "Take up your cross and follow me." But of course, Jesus is mocked and he's scourged, which means just beaten terribly, spit on, he's ridiculed, he's crucified, and in just, I think, 9 hours, as it describes here, he dies. All of this is very similar to how Matthew wrote it, but there's 2 things about the end of chapter 15 and then chapter 16 that I think are really interesting. There's a man named Joseph who asked to bring Jesus down from the cross. Pilate was even surprised that he was dead already. I guess crucifixion deaths usually took a lot longer than just 9 hours. But under Jesus is buried, it says, "And Joseph bought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud, and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of the rock." I had never heard of the Shroud of Turin, which is essentially a linen cloth that a man was buried in that was horribly beaten and abused. And there's this like imprint on the top layer of that cloth. It's essentially a negative. So as soon as we had the technology to take a negative of the negative, we got a positive image out of it. The history behind it is fascinating. I'd highly recommend you watch some videos or Google a little bit about the Shroud of Turin. I'm by no means an expert on that. I'm just now hearing about it and learning about it, but they do believe that this was the shroud that Jesus was wrapped in when he was buried. And it's a relic today because essentially through that image, you can see and print essentially a image of Jesus. And also in chapter 16, when Jesus is resurrected and he appears first to Mary Magdalene, it says, "Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons." I don't remember Matthew's gospel ever speaking about him casting out Mary's demons. And when I watched this scene in The Chosen, I actually thought it wasn't biblical. But this is why shows like that are great, and the creator, Dallas Jenkins, always says, go pick up the Bible and read it so that you actually understand, because we add things, we remove things, all that. And when Mary tells everyone, of course, they say, "We don't believe you. There's no way that happened. You're going crazy." I don't know if they actually said you're going crazy, but that's probably what they were thinking. So then he reveals himself to 2 more disciples, and after telling the rest, they still didn't believe them. So finally, he reveals himself to all 11, and immediately Jesus rebukes them for their unbelief and the hardness of their hearts. But then we get the reason why we're reading this today when he says, "Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned." Now, it is interesting that there's a note here. Some of the earliest manuscripts do not include 16:9 to 20. It makes me wonder if they were lost or if this is how Mark intended to finish, or maybe he was stopped before he finished. I don't know. There's a lot of ways that could go. Either way, though, that is it for the Gospel of Mark. And what a journey that was. We saw a lot of similarities between Matthew, and I think that enabled us to really pinpoint and hone in on the differences between Matthew and Mark, because just reading one or the other, you get the full story, but you don't know what you're missing, or you don't know what's extra important. So having read two of them makes a dramatic difference, which is what makes me even more excited to read our third, the Gospel of Luke, starting tomorrow. Make sure you're subscribed. I'm enjoying this so much, and I hope you are too.